This is the City of Frankfort Board of Commissioners work session. Today is June 12th, 5 p.m. And I will ask our city clerk to call the roll.
Commissioner Thompson. Commissioner Unger.
Present.
Commissioner Waldridge.
Present.
Commissioner May.
Present.
Mayor Wilkerson.
And present. And we do have a quorum. And we'll start with ceremonial and recognition. Would anybody like to add anything before we start? Commissioner Unger.
I just want to start by saying Happy Pride Month. I know that Capital Pride here in Frankfort is going to be having an event this Saturday. I think it's Sig Lusher. It's their 3rd annual Pride Party. So I wanted to mention that. And then I know the Franklin County Humane Society has been moving into their new location at 100 Companion Place. So look for a grand opening there because I know people are excited about that.
Commissioner Wallace.
I just wanted to say congratulations to Frankfort High graduates as they had an impressive almost 4 million, a little over 4 million of scholarships with this class, which is absolutely amazing. So congratulations to all Frankfort High graduates moving forward. Also, Juneteenth will be coming up this weekend, and for Frankfort on Race Relations, we'll be having an event, so please look out for those on the Facebook page. And I think they kicked it off tonight, I believe, at a talk at the library. So if you're listening and want to go to that, head on over, and maybe there'll be a talk there for the community. I think this is, and congratulations to Kentucky State on naming their next president. I'm super excited about that. He will start July 1 as his start date, and I think he will be on campus July 3rd, and appreciate those that went in attendance to meet him the other day. Last week, wasn't it? I think you had showed up, I heard. So super excited about that and what the trajectory of Kentucky State will be over the next year or so.
Is that it? We'll start with citizens' comments. Looks like we have a couple. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll start. Jim Terry, if you want to come up. Good to see you. And just come to the microphone and state your name. And we'll give you 5 minutes. We'll let you know if you're getting close. And just happy to have you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Jim Terry is my name. Glad to see you, meet the commissioners and Mayor Wilkinson up close to be part of this. Now, I came here before in the paper to have a little conversation about short-term rentals, Airbnb, but was that taken off the calendar? Okay. Well, perhaps I could talk a little bit about that.
Please.
It wouldn't be
I'm
bad.
sure it'll be on a discussion in the near future.
Maybe I can come back. Would y'all be available to answer a question or two, or do I just have to preach here?
You can just tell us what your thoughts are, and if we have questions, we'll follow up.
Okay, sure. Well, I'm Jim Terry, a lifelong resident of Frankfort. I live in Silver Lake, resident. I also own property in the historic section, where a lot of the Airbnbs are located. I've talked to several of my neighbors in Silver Lake. That's one of the neighborhoods that's maybe being expanded for this, according to the paper. Charlie Booz, a friend in the Housing Association, he said it's not wanted there. I appreciate the City Commission tackling this, getting information about B&Bs. I've had to learn a lot myself. I also own property downtown I'm really proud of. I used city funds, grants to renovate it a few years ago, and I rent that out long-term tenant on that. She has concerns. She came from Louisville because of the peace and quiet of the downtown. She likes the living close to the activities, free outdoor concerts, Capitol Expo, which I really enjoyed too. But she's concerned with parking issues with more transient residents in and out. And there are 4 B&Bs around my property, either side, behind it, and 2 there. I'm all for economic activity. I used to have a business online. I want Frankfort to grow. This is not the answer to housing problems, Airbnb. I'm not sure how much discussion has been on this because I wasn't at the last meeting. Perhaps I can come back. I'm for people that just want a place to live, to work, come home in peace and quiet. And I'm concerned that, learning about it, that there might be issues with short-term rentals, increased traffic, transient residents, things of that sort, trash pickup, stress infrastructure to pick it up, perhaps vandalism. I've talked to someone behind my property that owns property, making it into a bed and breakfast. So he said that there'd be peace and quiet. How would the city enforce these regulations for them to be quiet? I'm just wondering, you know, if there are wild parties, people, would they have to complain?
Probably, yeah. Somebody's gonna have to call the dispatch or the police, yeah.
They'd have to complain in order for something to take
Right.
action. Okay. Would my taxes be increased because of this Airbnbs popping up?
I would hope that your taxes would go down, as this is general revenue that would be going to the city of Frankfort.
Okay, so I was interested in that. No
Because
problem.
there is a tax that is allowed to be taxed on each night's rental for every dollar that is spent, and that is only able to be used now through statutory authority because of what the legislature essentially spelled out. It was already in there, but they spelled it out a little more clearly. There would be an increase in revenues that normally we would only receive for someone staying, say, at a hotel or things of that nature. But that same tax would then be used as a transient room tax, and there would be an increase in.
I wanted to ask about that, Mr. Thompson.
It's almost at 5 minutes. I just want to let you all know.
It seems like the Airbnbs are getting out of the hospitality tax that hotels have to pay.
We're going to get into it. This is going to be probably its own. This may be even its own special meeting at some point to go over all the nuances of the short-term rental. It really is that kind of topic that other cities are dealing with right now. How to address it. There's some pros and there's some cons. But there is going to be an opportunity for us to really get into but no, we appreciate your input on this because we're going to need more of it.
Well, I might say Lexington, who I've talked to, has voted regulated to stop any problems that might come up. Louisville has banned Airbnbs. I'm all for, you know, economic activity, but are there that many festivals that every room in the city is going to be booked? Do we need these Airbnbs popping up? You know, and other, and Tanglewood, Indian Hills, and where I live in Silver Lake, it said there might be expansion of these. Would there be caps on those areas?
All areas I think we can discuss.
Yeah. Well, those are things that have been recommended by the Planning Commission, but as of yet, this board has not taken that up.
I started.
I'm sure that's in the very near future, based on the input that we're hearing. But we do appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad to come because there's other things I want to listen to. Nice to meet you all.
I have to say, were you did you teach at Bondurant Middle back in?
I taught at Bondurant
Okay,
Middle.
well, I think I had you in. So just so you know, this is.
I'm not that old.
Thanks for, you know, helping me.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Terry.
Mr. Terry.
All right, next we have John Carlton. And welcome back.
John Carlton. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm here to discuss a new, important, and exciting era is now upon us. In 2011, the nonprofit USA 250 was organized to urge the federal government to prepare for and support the United States semi-quincentennial observances. In 2016, Congress and President Obama established by law the nonpartisan United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission to lead a coalition of public and private partners, all working to create initiatives and programs that honor the first 250 years and inspire Americans to imagine our next 250. Officially, the commemoration period known as America 250 began in 2020, culminates on July 4th, 2026, and officially concludes in 2027. Likewise, the Kentucky American Independence Semi-Quincentennial Commission, also referred to as the Kentucky Sesquicentennial Commission, was created through executive order and is attached to the Office of the Governor, advising both the Governor and Secretary of Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet. According to the website, Kentucky's celebration of America 250 KY will, quote, look at the bigger picture of the American experience and will explore Kentucky's role in the nation's history from the actions leading to the Revolutionary period until today, end quote. Beginning in July of this year, Frankfort and Franklin County commenced celebrating a series of 250th anniversary events spanning almost 20 years that include the 250th birthdays of Leestown and the United States in 2026, Frankfort in 2036, Kentucky and Frankfort as its capital in 2042, and Franklin County in 2045. However, the event that was the catalyst for all of the other events mentioned, at least for Frankfort and Franklin County, was the day the first survey was made of the land that would later become the little town of Frankfort, the capital of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the 15th state of the Union, and with Franklin County as her county seat. Though explorers Christopher Gist, John Finley, and Daniel Boone had all ventured through in the years after 1750, on Friday, July 16, 1773, a group of surveyors known as the McAfee Company, consisting of brothers Robert, James, and John McAfee, their brother-in-law James McCoon Jr., and the famous Bostonian Samuel Adams of both Lager and Boston Tea Party fame, entered the area now known as Frankfort with the intent of turning paper land grants into tangible claims. Hancock Taylor, deputy surveyor of Fincastle County, Virginia, of which the Frankfort area was then a part, had been with another company led by Captain Thomas Bullitt, for whom Bullitt County is named. The two groups had met at Kanawha River in what is now West Virginia and explored along the Ohio River until they reached the mouth of the Kentucky on July 7th, at which point Hancock Taylor departed from the Bullitt Company and joined the McAfee Company. The McAfee Company canoed up the Kentucky and arrived at Drenn's Lick Creek on July 10th. On the 16th, they traveled southeast following a small buffalo path the natives referred to as Alanant Owamioe, an ancient trace carved in the wilderness by prehistoric animals seeking salt, later used by buffalo mound builders, natives, and pioneer settlers. Today we refer to this ancient path simply as the Buffalo Trace. Later that day, the McAfee Company crossed the river at the ford at Leestown and entered what James McAfee called the Great Meadow on the river, and made camp on the ground where the old Capitol building now stands, according to historian Charles Hines. At the request of Robert McAfee, Hancock Taylor laid out two tracts of land, one for 400 acres and the other for 200. The survey of the larger tract began at a point marked by two white oaks, which have long since been removed, near the Kentucky River on Ann Street, 1 block south of Main Street.
1 minute.
A substantial part of the land surveyed in this tract was destined to become what we now know today as downtown Frankfort. The gracefully carved stone monument at the corner of Main and Ann Streets in front of Whitaker Bank was set up at this location during Frankfort's centennial celebration on October 6, 1886. Somehow in the preceding years, the monument ended up in a pile of rubble at the end of Ann Street and was recovered by Jenny Chin Morton, regent of the revived Kentucky Historical Society. Mrs. Morton had the stone polished and a new foundation created for a new unveiling of the monument on October 6, 1899, and a ceremony that included the great-grandniece of Hancock Taylor. At Frankfort's sesquicentennial, the 150th, a bronze tablet was unveiled in 1936 and was placed on a nearby brick building at the southeast corner of Main Street and Ann Street. The tablet can now be seen on display at the Capital City Museum.
That's time.
Mayor, may
Commissioner Thompson.
I move to suspend the rules to allow John to finish, please?
Any objection? No? Okay.
Thank you. Just have a few more paragraphs. For these reasons, with the help of Diane Dehoney at Paul Sawyer Public Library, Jessica Stavros of Liberty Hall, and Penny Peepler, I have put together two commemorative events to mark the 250th anniversary of Hancock Taylor's survey. First, there will be a symposium about the history of the event at Paul Sawyer Public Library on Saturday, July 15th with presentations by experts in various fields, including Dr. Drew Andrews of the Kentucky Geological Survey, Tressa Brown of the Kentucky Native American Heritage Commission, Candy Atkinson of the Kentucky Secretary of State's Land Office, and Emily Preston of the James Herod Trust, who is also a descendant of Robert McAfee, leader of the McAfee Company and the owner of the first survey of Frankfort. The following day, Sunday, July 16th, we are putting together a marker rededication ceremony that will hopefully feature appearances by many state and local dignitaries, include literature readings, and will have special music performed by the New Saxton's Cornet Band, a very historic ensemble that performed at the 1899 rededication ceremony. I have modeled the ceremony after many of the previous ceremonies for added symbolism. That ceremony will be followed by a special concert of the band. Time and venue are still being arranged, but I wanted to give the commission and the community ample notice that these events will be taking place. Moving forward, I asked the city and county to consider officially forming a founding Frankfort 250 commission to make necessary appropriations in order to adequately prepare and plan for these upcoming important celebrations. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate the information. All right, next up, staff reports.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to welcome Katie Beard, our Public Works Director, to give you an update on the temporary suspension of leaf and bulk item pickup, talk about recruitment, but also want to just add on, and we'll discuss it here, that I know there's been some questions that about our authority to temporarily suspend non-essential services. And under our solid waste ordinances, specifically 50.11, our Public Works Director, in consultation with the city manager, does have administrative authority to make changes nimbly, but of course always comes back to the BOC when in particular it's addressing fees and fines and things like that. And so we welcome this update from Katie on how things are going in our sanitation department.
Yes, so to follow up on that, I wanted you all to know, I know you don't know me very well, but I would never do anything lightly, make a decision like this lightly, or without wholeheartedly believing I had the authority to do so. And I did confer with Laura Hagg on this decision. So it was my understanding that some of the changes we made to our solid waste ordinance back in the fall gave the Public Works Director some of that leeway to make some of those decisions, as long as it didn't impact fees or fines. So, and then I just wanted to also start out, it's been a tough few months for the solid waste department, and I wanted to give them all kudos. They've worked so hard to get us through this time. They did everything that they could to avoid being where we are right now. And so I really appreciate them. I appreciate Byron. He's here to help me answer any questions you guys might have tonight, but I really appreciate how hard they've worked through all of this time. So that brings me to where are we? In terms of hiring the staff that we are short, we have scheduled 29 interviews over the past few weeks. A lot of them were unfortunately no-shows. Out of all of that, for various reasons, it didn't work out for some of those, and we've hired 2 full-time people out of all of those, and we have another one starting on Tuesday the 20th. That's next Tuesday, and we have more interviews scheduled in the next couple of weeks to hopefully fill those last 2 positions. What we want to do going forward from here, we also have made a big dent in our work orders, that we had a backlog of brush and bulk pickup items. So we have gotten to where we feel like we can reinstate the services. We have 2 options that we're proposing, and I want to kind of get your all's feedback on those. One would be to do a cleanup week in the community next week, starting next week. I know that's very short notice, but in conferring with Byron and Sarah on this, we feel like if you all approve that option, we can go ahead and start getting the word out on social media tomorrow. We can get it advertised in the newspaper for the weekend, and just get the word out There's a few people that I've actually promised to call and let them know when we're gonna do a free week, and we'll do that. So we'll do, that's option one, is to go ahead and do that free week next week, the 19th, that week. And then follow that up with reinstating services on July 1st. There is a proposal for a slight modification. Let me preface this with the reason for the modification is to help us be more efficient and to be able to pick up all of the items that are set out and to not have them left on the side of the road for weeks at a time like we were before the temporary suspension. If we have 15 items in an area and we know that ahead of time, we can put more people on that route. Whereas we might have 2 or 3 in another area, less people on that route. It'll help our decision making if we can have people call and let us know they're going to set out a bulky item. There's no charge. Everything else is exactly the same. We just want to know so that we can help schedule that. That will go for bulky items such as furniture, mattresses, any appliances, anything like that that people set out on their normal trash day. And that will also go for large piles of brush. It does not apply for yard waste in a can marked yard waste or in a brown lawn waste bag. So those, they can set out like normal, like always, with their trash, and we'll pick those up. But we would like them to, again, I think I said last time, it'll be a transition. We don't expect them to all know this rule and abide by it on July 1st. But we would like to start implementing that on July 1st and kind of transition into by the fall, hopefully, everybody will have the information at that point, and they can call and schedule for us to pick it up on the Monday before their trash day that week. So that is it in a nutshell. Like I say, I'm open to questions. Byron is here to help me answer questions because he is the expert, of course, on this topic.
All right, I'm sure there's questions.
I'd also like to thank Streets Department, our flood wall department. There's many other departments who have chipped in to help out. So appreciate their support of our crew because they're a great crew.
Yes, good point. I forgot to do that. Without them helping out, we couldn't be at this point either because they did step in and pick up a lot of piles of brush and deliver carts and upgrade carts. And we'll also be calling on them again for cleanup weeks to help us because we are short of drivers right now and still short of workers. I didn't go over option 2. The reason option 2 is pushed out to July 10th is because we had several people scheduled for vacations in the next 2 weeks between. So the last week of June, first week of July, probably won't be the best weeks for us staffing wise to do a cleanup week. But that is an option to push it out if we want to allow to give a little more public notice to everybody to get their stuff out. But those are the 2 alternatives.
Commissioner Waters?
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. Are these your sub dates? Because I was thinking she was looking for a vote from us on which ones we wanted to go with, and I just needed to know, do we need to make a motion or just accept what she's done, because she's given us a second option of, do we think we need to push it out to July 10th to give people more time, or do we want to keep it for next week and hope the next 7 days or this next 6 days will get people ready to put out their trash on the following Monday? So are we...
I think the best option I would go with is next week because we know that people have left things out and we just want to run these past you. If there was lots of concerns, please share your concerns now. And then we could go with another week. But I don't know if Commissioner Unger or Commissioner Thompson have any concerns or questions that they would like to ask or about these options.
He has a concern.
Commissioner Thompson?
It might just be a question. You don't know.
Well, she said concern. It's a concern.
Ms. Beard, I first of all want to make it clear that I don't think you would ever make any decision lightheartedly. Also don't think you would ever make any decision that you did not think you had the legal right to do. I wholeheartedly disagree with the city manager's opinion on this. not only because there is statutory authority under 109, 200, 89A, multiple places where it discusses after the 1979 federal law that required local municipalities to handle trash, that it became the responsibility of the local government to make decisions about services provided. My concern is that now we are being provided a document that essentially says that we will be able to go back essentially to where we were, except we will ask that if you want to have other items picked up, yard waste, bulky item collections, that they'll have to do that by coordinating a pickup time, and that we want to limit that to 20 per day. I don't understand if the solid waste department believed that they had the full authority to make these decisions, why we're now have this information brought to us and basically said that this is what we're giving you the option of what you think should happen. But I will say that my reading and interpretation of the law is completely different. We had a meeting 12 hours before a letter went out from the city manager's office. It was never discussed. It was never talked about. Could have been brought up in new business, other business, old business, any business. It was never discussed. And when issues like this, that are so big that they impact the city of Frankfort, and whether we want to admit it or not, the city of Frankfort has had a detrimental effect by this decision. And I have hundreds of photos, and it goes without saying that any other business that has issues with staffing and other things, we don't get to take days off. We still get the work done. And when it comes to public works and services that we provide, we have to be able to provide those services.
I don't disagree.
I respect everyone in your division greatly. What they do is an amazing job. However, I think that it could have at least been discussed. And I think that is where a lot of the angst and issues came from, that we were not even brought into the conversation. We can disagree on who has the authority to do whatever, but we were not even told until this happened. And that's kind of been part of it.
That's understandable, and I think in the future we will bring it to you, and that's as a courtesy. That's why I'm bringing this to you, to get your feedback. And I'm not a legal person, so I don't know the ins and outs.
We're not going to work that out tonight, I think. City attorney want to say something?
Just a couple of things. As city attorney, I think I should weigh in on the legal side of things. And I did look, after the decision was made, I went back and looked at our public works ordinances. And in a minute, Commissioner, I want to ask you about the federal law, or maybe later. But our ordinances, when we made those changes in 2022, the intent of the changes to the solid waste ordinances was to provide that flexibility to make those administrative decisions that didn't affect fees, penalties, or the essential services that we have to provide to the city. That was, the intent was to create some efficiency. And so when those, if I can, when those passed, that was the intent. So I completely understand why Katie felt like, and not just Katie, Laura and Katie too, felt like that was an administrative decision because it was temporary, because it was non-essential. Any permanent suspension would have, I think, no doubt been brought, or anything more intense. Now, speaking to the federal laws, I don't want to put Katie on the spot tonight. I'm not familiar with the laws that you just mentioned. I'm not on Facebook, so I haven't seen any of the the back and forth. But Commissioner, if you would please just forward me those laws so I can take a look so that we can discuss and be better prepared
Sure.
in the future.
Sure.
Hold on, we got, and Commissioner May. Commissioner May, do you want to go real quick?
Sure, just to clarify the discussions that were happening, we all received an email on April 25th, 2023, with an attachment that discussed this happening on May 8th. So I think it's important that we just reiterate that we did have time.
Not all of us received that, sir.
Yes, sir, you did. On March 20th, I made sure that you were on all the group emails. You received it, and you received it twice. On April 25th, I double-checked, and May 8th. Sorry to interrupt, Commissioner May.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I don't know about, you know, if you received it or not. I can see on my end that it went to commissioners on April 25th. And the attachment here lets us know that the suspension would begin on Monday, May 8th. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that there were emails going out to us, and we did have an opportunity to discuss it if we felt like there were serious concerns. From my standpoint, that's how I feel.
Any other discussion on this? I guess we're.
I mean, everybody always wants to see my phone, so there's my phone. It can show that there were no emails received on that date.
Well, now's not the time to go through all of this. I
Well,
think where we are right now is, are we reinstating July 1st?
That's what I
Full
would
service?
like to propose, yes.
And
We
next
do a
week,
cleanup
there's gonna
week
be a
next
full
week,
pickup.
pick up
Any
everything like a
yard
normal
waste
free
that's
week,
out there on the
everything.
road,
Yard waste and
any
bulky items.
mattresses that people have set out that we
Mhm.
get pictures of that people,
Right, just like our normal
all that's
regulations,
gonna be
everything in a
picked up
bag, we
next
will
week.
pick up.
and going for July 1st, full service with some slight modification.
Right, yeah,
So
that is,
we ask you to RSVP in advance, so to speak. Let us
yeah,
know.
let us know so that we can plan
And
better.
then what happens if somebody hasn't they don't let us know and they still set it out?
I think for like maybe a couple months, I'll speak with Byron about this, but there needs to be a transition period where we will still pick it up because maybe they don't know, they haven't learned, they haven't gotten that information yet. But then at some point, I suppose it could be tagged
Okay. All right,
as
Commissioner Walker.
non-compliant.
I just wanted to add, I'm good with moving forward with next week. I just want to make sure that we do get it out, and and it's a good thing we're talking about it now. So if we are going to move forward, it will be on our Channel 10 and Facebook for people to watch that and have knowledge. But it just concerns me that there may be some people that are on vacation that next week and are not able to put it out, or vice versa, that they'll need to call you maybe to set up that appointment because it is such short notice. Because there's still plenty of wood from the, out there and things like that are still sitting on there. So I think the overall issue is that, and maybe Commissioner Thompson will quote me law, I'm not sure, but I just think that the goal was we should have used that city commission meeting to get it out to the public, so like we're doing now, so it'll play the next couple of weeks, because it really is hard to get it to everyone. So I hope that we're gonna use the app to get that out, start putting messages in the Waste app. So if you don't have the Waste app, please download Frank Waste app and put in your address, and it will tell you pickups and anything that changes in your waste travel. So it's really easy to download. So please go and download Frank Waste to get more information. So thank you, Katie. I appreciate you.
Is there any other discussion for? Good?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And next, we'll move on to discussion items. And before we begin here, I was hoping, without any objection, that we could table number 2, the US 127 road improvement project.
Mayor, ask we move.
Okay. A motion.
Motion.
Yeah. Okay,
Second.
motion to move that in a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, great. And we will revisit that. They just need more time to finalize some decisions and the anticipated cost on that. So, okay, so we'll scratch that. So next, discussion item number 1.
Yes, thank you. Want to welcome Vicki Berenberg and Donovan Rempkema of Place Economics in February 2022. As you all may recall, with the city, the BOC authorizes certified local government grant application, including the required match to conduct an analysis of historic preservation's impact on Frankfort's local economy. City contracted with Place Economics of Washington, D.C. to conduct the analysis, which specifically considers property value growth, jobs from historic rehab activity, heritage tourism, and neighboring demographics. Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you, Laura, and good evening, Mayor and Board of Commissioners. Tonight, the principal of Place Economics, Donovan Ripkema, is here to present to you an executive summary of the findings of his firm's analysis regarding historic preservation in Frankfort. Donovan has over 30 years' experience in measuring the contribution that a community's heritage makes to local economies. His firm has worked both nationally and internationally. The report is being ready for publication, and this is primarily a preview this evening. Donovan will return to Frankfort on June 22nd to give a more in-depth presentation of the findings of the report, and that presentation will take place in the community room at the Paul Sawyer Public Library beginning at 5 p.m. And with that, I will turn it over to Donovan. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Mayor and Commissioners, thank you both for allowing us to do this study and for finding time on tonight's agenda to give you just a summary, some highlights of what we learned. We loved working in Frankfort on this, so we really enjoyed the opportunity. So just to start out, to frame everything, some basic. So in Frankfort, and I'm going to tell you something that I know you all know, but it formed the kind of basis on how we looked at this, that like most cities, Frankfort has, you call them historic zoning districts, most places call them local historic districts, but the areas that are overseen by the Architectural Review Board, local districts. Then there are also National Register districts. Now sometimes those are overlapping, that there's a National Register district covered by a local district, but there are some areas in Frankfort that are National Register districts but not local districts. And the only reason that makes any difference is in those National Register districts, they provide the threshold to tap into both the federal and the state tax credits for historic rehabilitation, but they are not subject to design review by the Architectural Review Board. Most of our analysis is on the local districts, particularly in the area of demographics and property value change, because those are where that's really affected by the decisions that the city made creating those districts and the Architectural Review Board. The broader areas of job creation by rehabilitation and the heritage tourism is kind of doesn't kind of matter whether it's a local or national district. So just to understand, it's about 2.5% of the land area of the city in each the local districts and the National Register districts, around 10% of the population, 12% of the properties, 15% of the buildings are in either the local or the National Register districts. Now, I know that the city like Frankfort suffers to some extent by the fact that you have so many exempt properties, or not subject to property taxes. Well, the historic districts, both the local and the national, in fact, have a disproportionate share of those exempt properties. Nothing much you can do about it, but just to kind of understand. And then the value contribution of the properties of the taxable value contribution of the historic districts, again, is about the same proportion as the population of the whole. So that's just to kind of frame what we were looking at. Then, again, the kind of demographics, who lives in historic districts, was really important. We looked at that in many ways, including by race. And frankly, it's a pretty good example of historic districts being a mirror of the city. On the left-hand column is who lives in the historic districts. On the right-hand, who lives in the city as a whole. There's a slight, kind of statistically minor, but slight greater share of white people in the historic district, a slightly less percentage of black people, but not significant. You have a very small Asian population in Frankfort, and they aren't very well represented in the historic districts, but it's so small, 2 Asian families could move in the historic district and the numbers would shift around. So really, we kind of feel philosophically that historic districts ought to be a demographic mirror of the whole, and Frankfurt really meet that test. And then we looked at the spread between owners and renters, that in the rest of Frankfurt it's about half and half between owners and renters. In the local historic districts it's about a third homeowners, 2/3 renters. And then we looked at the income distribution. The median household income in Frankfurt is just shades over $50,000. So we broke the categories into 50 households, 50,000 and less, 50,000 to 100,000, 100,000 and more. Well, and this is sometimes a myth breaker, that sometimes in other places, historic districts saying, well, they might be fine, but they're all for the rich white people. Well, that's not the case, in fact, in Frankfurt. That there is a larger share, significantly larger share of households in the under 50,000 category that live in historic district, and a slightly lesser share of the upper end of the income. But again, what it really is saying is that the whole breadth of the population, citizens of Frankfurt, is being served, calling these historic districts home. By the way, I'm happy to stop for questions when I'm done, but if you have any in between, just please jump in. And then we looked at building activity in the historic districts. Again, this in both the local and historic districts. And you'll think it's a kind of a weird thing we did, but I'll explain why. We separated out the projects that took place that used the state tax credit, because we kind of wanted to understand the effectiveness of that in Frankfurt. And so, but we didn't want to be double counting numbers. So then we sorted out permit activity in the historic districts, excluding the tax credit projects. Again, the dollars that I'll talk about in terms of the permit activity understate the numbers for a couple of reasons. We get those numbers from the permit. So we took 10 years or 20 years, whatever it was, of permits issued, but candidly, people often don't tell the whole number in the permit application. And some real costs of projects are, in fact, you don't have to require that as part of the permit numbers. But what we're really looking at is that here we have the historic districts with 12% of the land area, but a disproportionate share of the investment, both in terms, almost a third of all permits went to historic districts, even though it's still 12% or so of the number of buildings that you get permits on, and a higher share as well of the dollars. What it really is saying is that there's a skew, there's a disproportionate choice of making investment in these historic districts, certainly in your great downtown, but also in the residential neighborhoods. And over this period that we looked, the last roughly 10 years, 9 years, there's about $51 million of what people said, this I'm spending money rehabilitating this historic building. $51 million spent in investment in those historic districts, and that $51 million generated about another $24 million in economic activity in Frankfurt. So all of these numbers, by the way, are in Frankfurt, so it's not what happens someplace else, so it's very localized impacts. And then we looked at the state's tax credit project, and it's for since I think 2007 or so, Kentucky has had a state tax credit, but it's just in the last legislature a big boost to the cap of that. So hopefully you'll see a lot more of this activity. But once again, in the kind of myth-breaking category, sometimes those things like tax credits are saying, well, that's all right, but nobody uses those but giant developers. Well, it really wasn't true, is that in Frankfurt, is that over a quarter of those were projects of less than $25,000. And then almost half of them were under $50,000. So it really is almost a mom and pop kind of tax credit. It can be used at every level. I think over the period we looked at, there were 90 buildings, roughly half and half between commercial buildings and residential properties that used the tax credit, but I strongly suspect you're going to see that jump up a lot with this new cap on that's available for the tax credit. So, but it's clearly working at all levels. And then a legitimate concern. I mean, I come from the real estate background, is saying, okay, you have this. If I'm in this historic district, I have to go and appear before some commission to see if I can do stuff or not, and their job is to tell people no. So we looked at at 15 years or so, 12 or 15 years worth of decisions by the Architectural Review Board. Well, almost over 75% of all of the applications for a certificate of appropriateness, the kind of approval stamp, were done stamp level, to staff level. The property owner didn't have to go to the board at all. Another quarter or so went to the commission and was approved. 1% of all the applications over this 12 or 15 was turned down.
How many
So-
permits are you talking about, sir? Like overall in that period you're talking about?
30 a year, 40 a year, Vicki?
We have about between 30 and 40 that go to the ARB annually.
So maybe that's, you're talking about 400 permits, just understanding what 75, 25, 1%? Great.
So 20 or 30 that go to the Architectural Review Board, and then 50 or 60, if the ratio, there's decided the staff.
Yeah, generally 75%-ish
Okay.
get approved at the staff level.
So what it's doing is to say that the work that's done is kind of consistent with the character of the neighborhood, but it's not an onerous thing where a bunch of people are being told no every year. Most years, I mean, it's kind of every other year over the last 12 or 13, somebody said, no, you can't do that. And then we looked at property values, again, in the local districts and in the local residential districts and the rest of the city. We looked at single-family houses. Now, I will tell you a challenge here, and that was in most cases when we do these studies, we use assessment data. And it's good because it's 100% of the properties and we see it over time. We were just told time after time in the meetings we held, many of you attended during the time, well, here, while it's getting better, assessment data for kind of long-term, just not very reliable. So thankfully, Joe Johnson said, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll let you tap into the multiple listing service data. And so we looked at 20 years worth of MLS data, about 6,000 sales of single-family properties at that time. Again, I don't mean to be too geeky about this, but when the disadvantage of going to actual sales, the advantage is actual human beings traded the property at that price. The disadvantage is if sometimes it's a small sample error, you have only 6 sales in a year, and so things can get kind of screwy looking. So what we did, but with that, all that MLS data and 6,000 sales, about 500 or 550 within the local historic districts, we bunched them into 3-year increments. So we'd have enough sales in any period so we could see the measurement. And so you can see what happened is that the increase in value over that time, in fact, the regulated local historic districts outperformed the rest of the market. And of particular importance, I think, it's not that in the big Great Recession and the real estate crash of the end of the 2010s and into 2014 or so, while there was a decline in value much less steep in the historic districts and the recovery stronger. So that we did the measurement on dollar per square foot of selling price. We also then just looked though at how did the average sale price in terms of the whole property sale change. Well, over that time period in the rest of the city, property values up about 56%, about 75% in the local historic district. So once again, it's really reflecting the marketplace's preference for that. They're paying a premium because of what they're buying in the historic districts. And then, I don't know if Frankfort has gotten into debates about density, but lots of cities now have, and people, city planners, infrastructure design people, police departments all say, you know, if we're going to provide efficient public services, we have to have density. And sometimes the criticism of historic districts is, hey, you're telling people they can't tear stuff down, and so you're preventing us from having density. Well, so we looked at the residentially zoned property in Frankfort, and the density in the historic districts almost twice of what it is in the rest of the residential areas in Frankfort. And it's density to human scale. It's density achieved not by 20-story condominiums, but by the nature of the lot size, the house size, the characteristics of the neighborhood. So you have very dense neighborhoods in areas that people don't think of as dense. This is just a cool neighborhood to live in. And then heritage tourism. Again, we purchased from Longwoods International, the firm that does the state's tourism research. and we bought their data that we could sort. They don't do, as part of their process, a sorting between heritage and other kinds of visitors. We worked with them to get a definition of heritage visitors. We got the Franklin County data and sorted it. So this again is very kind of nuanced, granular data. And between overnight visitors and daytime visitors, about a third of all visitors that come to Frankfort would fall into the heritage visitor category, but about 40% of all the tourism expenditures come from those particular types of tourists. They spend more when they're here, so they have a bigger, significantly bigger economic impact visitor by visitor than do non-heritage visitors. And then when people go on vacation, they basically spend their money on 5 areas. They spend it on lodging, they spend it on food and beverage, they spend it on local transportation, they spend it on retail purchases, and they spend it on what are called entertainment, sightseeing, amusements, whatever the kind of things you do. Well, not only do the heritage visitors spend more, they spend more in every single one of those categories. So whether you own a restaurant, own a retail shop, or own an amusement of some kind, in fact, the heritage visitors are spending more in that operation.
Heritage visitors include bourbon visitors, or is that separate? The heritage visitors, does that include bourbon visitors?
What we did, I will tell you how we defined it, is the Longwood survey basis. They asked 2 sets of questions. One about what did you do at your when you traveled. The other one are what are your areas of special interest. In those categories, there was one visiting historic sites and landmarks. There was one visiting museums. In the other area, there was interest in historic towns, but those was kind of 2 out of that category that we said we're going to call those our heritage visitors. And anybody that didn't do any of those things or have that interest is the non-heritage visitor. So those are the basic things. So there's the difference in the overnight visitors, but the pattern with the day visitors is the same thing. Now there's no lodging expenditure for daytime visitors, but in every one of those other categories, again, they spent more in those categories in their visits to Frankfort. But this has real consequences in terms of jobs, both direct jobs and indirect and induced jobs in all of those categories. 400, 500 jobs, full-time job equivalents, direct job equivalents in Frankfort come from the heritage portion of the visitor industry. So it's a big part of the local economy and a growing one. So as Vicki said, we'll have we wanted to put enough factoids together because of your meeting tonight, but we'll have a more thorough presentation on the 22nd, and we encourage you all to be there. But thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. Any questions for Donovan? It's good information. It's exciting.
Great.
All right. See you on the 22nd, right?
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're skipping 2, and we'll go on to 3. Flock camera presentation.
Yes. Want to welcome Chief Bowman and representatives from Flock, I think Laura Ann Holland, and one others who I'm sorry I don't have your name. Want to say thanks, Chief Bowman, because some of us were able to learn about Flock at the invitation of Lexington Mayor Linda Gordon to learn about what it is and what it isn't. It's a license plate reader system. It takes photos of license plates, not people, and is another tool for our police department to help solve crime. And we welcome to hear more and hear about the public meetings that you guys have planned.
So thank you all for letting us do this presentation tonight. I know we've been through this for a few months. We've had a couple of online education sessions. We've had the one in person in Lexington, and then I thought, why not? We got a couple more steps to take. So without further ado, I will introduce Miss Amy Cornell and Lauren Holland from Flock. As they're coming up here, if y'all like, as they're coming up here, I do want to let y'all know we have another step to this, to where we'll have a public education meetings next week on the 22nd. And we'll get those times announced as well. That way the public can come in, and kind of like a community event, to have them come in and get all the information they need. But, Laura?
Thanks so much, Chief Bowman. Thanks, Mayor Wilkerson, Commission, and thanks so much, City Manager Haig, for having us here to talk about flock safety. City Manager Haig and Chief Bowman said, I'm Laura Ann Holland, and this is my colleague Amy Cornell. We work in local government policy and community education for Flock. And so we're going to take a few minutes to describe the system overall, what it does, what it doesn't do, what kind of problems it can help you guys solve in Frankfort, and also talk through some of the important policy details that are behind the system. So just to let you guys know a little bit about where we came from. Our company was founded about 6 years ago by a guy who was himself a victim of property crime. And so he had a burglary in his neighborhood. He had video footage from his cameras on his house. He provided that to the police and thought, oh, they're going to find this person immediately. But what he didn't realize is how hard it is for police to take video camera footage and then turn that into an actionable lead. What they told him was that they really needed a license plate number to figure out who it was that had entered his neighborhood. And so he said, well, you know what? That's something that I can solve. And so he worked with his neighbors and decided to put up a very first Flock device in his neighborhood to capture a license plate of vehicles coming into their neighborhood. Sure enough, a few weeks later, that vehicle came back to rob his neighbor, and this time they had the back image of the car so that they could provide that data to police. I tell you that story because I do think it's really important for all of us to realize we're coming at this as neighbors, right? As citizens, we all want to work together and address all of the concerns and questions that people have when we're talking about new police tools. So our technology that we're talking about today is primarily a license plate reader. We see it be really effective in helping your departments multiply the force that they have. We know across the country departments are really struggling with recruitment, retention, an increase in violent crime, an increase in crime across the board. There's new ways that criminals are hiding their behavior, and so we know that police are struggling with a lot of things, and our technology can help them by giving them the objective data that they need instead of having to chase down leads that otherwise would not prove actionable. This statistic isn't necessarily relevant for Frankfort, but I do share this because I think it's helpful to know just how hard it is to solve crime, right? So when I shared that story at the beginning, but when we think about what it takes to get from a report of a crime all the way through to case resolution, there are so many steps in that process for your police, and it can be really hard to provide resolution to victims. So we want to think about what can we implement that can have the biggest bang for our buck, right? Provide the most resolution to victims, and we believe that focusing on images of the back of the car can do that, because about 70% of crimes are committed with vehicles. And so if you get that data in the hands of your police, they'll be able to make a real impact on crime reduction. So why is Frankfort a great opportunity for a partner for Flock, right? We know that you guys are experiencing an increase in violent crime. Many communities have these same headlines across the board, right? And we know that your chief, in asking to consider a Flock partnership, is looking for a creative solution, right? What are other cities doing that we can now try to implement and emulate that's working? And this is how other cities have used us, right? I included a few benchmark cities in this presentation. I don't know who you guys typically look to in other states, right? I know some of the local groups. But these are some attraction cities from Greenville and from Tupelo. They vary very much in population, but both of these communities are partners. You can see their crime rates, especially in Greenville, are pretty high, and so they have a wide range of Flock devices throughout the city. Whereas Tupelo has a lower crime rate, and they use only about 16 of our devices, but still 16 at this point. These are other benchmark cities, right? Other capital cities, so people who are experiencing a large influx of people coming into town during the legislative session or during maybe a historical event, as we just heard from the previous presentation. And Little Rock in particular has a lot of our license plate reading devices, and they use our gunshot detection technology as well. Springfield, Illinois is another example where they're much larger in population, but they have a pretty high crime rate and have 84 of our devices across the city. This is how so we're working with some of our other partners in Kentucky, right? So in Georgetown and in Versailles, both of those communities have Flock devices deployed, and of course in Lexington and in Louisville, right? So when you're thinking about how are other cities using this technology, is this something that Frankfort is prepared to do? You're in good hands, right? We're working with thousands of other communities across the country, and this wouldn't be something new for Frankfort to do. These are just a list of some of our customers in Kentucky for you all. At this point, I'll pass it over to my colleague Amy, who will talk through how the technology actually works and what it does not do.
Good evening. So I will jump right in. I want to talk to you a little bit about what you would see on when the flock camera takes a photo. So this is the back of this vehicle that you're seeing here. You see the license plate, the make and model of the vehicle. There will be a timestamp on it, so you'll know which camera this came off of in your city, and you'll also have some information on just the back of the vehicle. Most importantly, as Laura Ann mentioned, what is really important is to talk through what the technology is not. So what you're looking at is we refer to as a vehicle fingerprint. So this is basically indiscriminate evidence. You can't tell who's driving that vehicle. It's just the back of the car, and it's not tied to any sort of records that could identify the occupants or occupant of that car. So no facial recognition, and it's not tied to traffic enforcement. And then what is the tech? As Laura Ann mentioned, it is a license plate recognition. It is real-time alerts to really multiply the force and tell police about wanted vehicles. So what the technology is not, as I mentioned, not tied to personal identifiable information. There's zero facial recognition used. It's not predictive policing. And the data, which we'll get into a little bit later as well, is not stored beyond 30 days. So it's stored securely in the cloud, encrypted end to end, and it goes away after 30 days unless it's being used for investigative purposes. So how the technology really works, and this is really key to the work that Flock does. So the proactive real-time alerts when stolen or wanted vehicles enter your city. So most stolen or wanted vehicles and the occupants in that car, those vehicles, are not just driving through your city just to pass through. They're looking to commit more crimes. So that's where this technology is very proactive in identifying these vehicles, getting those folks off the street before they're able to commit more crimes in your city. Also, it's a great investigative tool for police as a force multiplier. As clearance rates are increasing, crime is decreasing, and the flock cameras are acting as a deterrent. I wanted to talk here a little bit more about our retention policy and why that's important. So our standard is 30 days of the retention. Basically, the reason for that is because that is a good way that we've found kind of a sweet spot to protect privacy, but also at the same time allow police to use this as an effective investigative tool.
Yeah, so Chief Bowman has already provided an ALPR policy that his department's going to use. I'm sure he's happy to provide a copy if he hasn't already done so, and we'll make sure to have those at the public meetings coming up next week. But these policies that we encourage all of our customers to implement outline all of the permitted uses of the technology, how the investigators and patrol officers are expected to use it, how they're prohibited from using it. It includes things like the sharing policy, what other departments you'll share with locally. Chief Bowman's policy includes a verification of hot list alerts and how to maintain those notifications and alerts within the department and make sure they stay relevant. It also includes some pretty comprehensive audit procedures, a misuse policy, and training requirements, right? So when you think about the back end of making sure that your police department has everything in order to make this an effective program and to make sure that it's not just something that you're spending money on and isn't being used in the right way, your chief has done the back end work to make sure it'll be implemented from day one effectively. Chief Bowman and our solutions consultants, who are former police officers who have used this technology in the field and helped design maps for where the technology can go, have provided a few options for our where we could deploy in Frankfort, right? So option A is 10 cameras. That would be the smallest number of cameras in our first deployment. Option B would be 17 cameras. And it gets a wider area of the state, of Frankfort. So you can get some state highways and maybe where there's a lot more traffic. And then option C would be 20 cameras. So just a few more cameras, but you'd be able to cover going in and out of specific areas where there are high traffic as opposed to just one of those directions. Each of these, of course, has a different cost that we're happy to talk through in any questions and answers. But we know that there might be a desire to start with a smaller amount at first and then move forward with a larger deployment just as a test. And our team is happy to help you guys with modifying the maps. I know that Chief Bowman is particularly interested if you guys have more questions. He mentioned that you guys could talk to him about the details of where those locations are afterwards. but in a public presentation would prefer not to share investigative details. Okay, I'll pass it back to Amy. I think this is honestly probably the most important part of the conversation. So we've got some contract details coming.
Thanks, Laura Ann. So I want to talk a little bit about what Flock does and how we put measures into place to ensure that we're protecting the privacy of all residents and visitors to your city. So the footage that is being utilized by the Flock system is owned strictly by the agency. So Frankfort Police will own all the footage. Flock does not access it. We don't use it for any purposes. It's all owned by, it's never shared by us. It's never utilized by us at all. And I mentioned the 30-day data retention policy. So basically what that means is any vehicle that's not being used for investigative purposes, any snapshot vehicle fingerprint, as I mentioned before, that will go away after 30 days. So it disappears, it's in the cloud, and then it's gone after 30 days, it's not being used. And the data is stored securely in the Amazon Web Services cloud. We use the highest level of government protection type cloud that you can use, that the FBI and CIA also use, so it's the most secure that we have, and it's end-to-end encrypted of all your data. So also what's really important to note is an investigative search reason is needed to even to do a search in the system. So if somebody goes into the system from the police department, they need this to be tied to a case. So somebody either needs to have called the tip in or reported a crime, or on some level they would have to get information that a crime has been committed for them to do a search, to type in a search reason and recover data. As I mentioned, no facial recognition software, and it's not connected to any third-party databases whatsoever. So no Carfax, no DMV records or anything. As I mentioned back on that vehicle fingerprint slide, really what you're just seeing is the back of the vehicle. One of the things that is unique that we offer that I want to talk to you a little bit about is the transparency portal. This is a way of letting the public know how the system is being used and what it's being used for. What's really interesting about this is something that's offered to everybody who partners with Flock and is included as part of the package. So this is customizable for your agency, so you can determine what to put in the transparency portal and what not to. You could put this on your website, you could link it to your Facebook page. You could link metrics, you could say how many searches have occurred, how many vehicle photographs, how many different agencies throughout the area that you share data with. You can include that. You can put your policy in this transparency portal, and really a good way to let the community know exactly how you're using the system and how it's working.
Yeah, and that's completely free and won't take any man hours from your police department. We automate that and it updates regularly. So Chief Bowman mentioned this at the beginning, but we're planning on having some community education sessions next week. I think June 22nd is the date that Chief Bowman's looking at, but we'll do a morning and an evening session just to make sure the public has the opportunity to learn about the system and to ask any questions that they have. We've done these in a wide variety of communities, and I think it really is helpful for building strong support. So now to actually talk about how this solves crime, right? We've talked a lot about what it does and the policy framework, but this actually is working in communities across the country. And so we want to share some stories about how we've been able to help local police departments. I will say before I go to this next slide, this slide deals with some really sensitive material, so I will just give everybody a warning to be prepared for that. Yakima, Washington was our first customer in the state of Washington, and they installed 22 cameras at first as part of a pilot project, right? They wanted to test it for a year. The very first day that our cameras were installed, they had a really tragic kidnapping where a child was sexually assaulted and dropped off at a park. They were able to obtain DNA evidence, and they got a vehicle description from the child. And within the hour, they found the suspect vehicle and license plate from Flock's technology, and they found that same vehicle already casing another school. So immediately, right, they were able to have real-time results to provide resolution in this really tragic incident. This is a case study out of Lexington that describes the value of having the license plate reading data shared among departments, right? So this is a really tragic situation where there was a serial shooting suspect. There was a shooting and they had fled the scene in a stolen vehicle. They were able to use our cameras to identify that vehicle and find out where it was. And then they were also able to use our cameras to find out that that same vehicle and same suspect had been also associated with the shooting of the Scott County Sheriff Deputy. And so they were able to provide resolution in both of those incidents, right, for both the Lexington community and for Scott County. I'll let Amy close us out with a couple other case studies.
And to show you a couple other real-life examples of how this flock technology works, this is a carjacking. This is out of North Carolina. So flock safety was alerted by the police there, this is in Elizabethtown, that a vehicle was wanted in connection with an armed carjacking. It's a very violent carjacking. Officers used the information to identify the vehicle based on the description, and they were able to make an arrest. This one is one where a woman was walking along a service road, and she was hit. It was hit and run. She was hit and she was killed. And near the location of the hit and run, police were actually able to recover a part of the vehicle. So they could tell what the color of the vehicle was, and they used that information to identify a vehicle that had been traveling through the area thanks to the flock camera system. We're able to put those two things together. So you have some really great investigative work matched with the flock camera system, and they were able to identify the driver and make an arrest. And I'll close on this one. I won't go through all of those statistics with you, but this really just shows in the first 3 months with 25 Falcon cameras, these are the results that Lexington PD had. So just to highlight a couple of these, from the NCIC database, which is the main database that connects with the flock system to generate alerts, there were 57, 2 warrants, and they were able to locate 11 missing persons were recovered, 25 guns seized, and a total of 97 people who were charged with crimes. So I'll end on that, and we are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioner Unger.
Thanks for being here. I had a couple questions. I have had some in the community reach out about flock, and I was unable to attend the Lexington tour, which I was really sad, but something came up at work, my other full-time job, so I was really sad to miss that, but I appreciate you doing this and also organizing some community events, because I think that's going to be really important, so thank you guys for that. So I was wondering, I know, I was worried a little bit about staff time that might be required to respond to what the cameras are alerting, and also just requiring to man the cameras. So could you talk a little bit about how that might maybe take away from patrol that's, already going on?
Yeah, just to clarify, no one has to man these cameras.
Okay.
So the proactive piece is what the patrol officers will receive, and that actually will help them figure out where to go, right? So right now, patrol officers are, of course, patrolling, making sure everything is safe, but this will actually alert them in the event that there's something criminal that is entering the community, right? As opposed to maybe just like monitoring and watching and seeing if something criminal will happen. Okay. The investigative portion is the detectives, so detectives will be using that piece.
Okay.
And just to kind of explain, look at it this way, as this being it's no different when this camera alerts, no different than someone getting on the phone calling dispatch, with the exception it's a lot quicker because it goes immediately. The officers will get immediately notified of what a hit list or something that it would be on.
Thank you. That's a good way to look at it.
There's no one sitting at the EOC watching it.
No, there is not. Dispatch will get notifications. The officers, anybody with the NCIC link terminal, with like an MDT, would get a notification. But we're not dedicating anybody like Lexington as their live time. We won't have anybody like that. Mm-hmm. Unless y'all want to increase my budget a little more. That's fine.
See how successful.
I just wanted to share, in the Lexington area and how that it works. I know that there's a little bit larger because they use a couple of other different systems with their flock system that may come later for us to take in consideration. But there was an officer getting gas at the gas station on Versailles Road in Lexington, and then a car came to a stop at a light, and it actually broke down. And as the officer was pulling out, he noticed the vehicle pulled up behind the vehicle just to help assist the driver. Come to find out, it came across his scanner that it was actually a car they were looking for from the flock system. And I mean, just their bad luck that their car broke down there, and one went running across the road and he got the other, and he just gave up the other guy. But that helped him be able to do that, you know, and realize what he was dealing with instead of getting out, not knowing what he's dealing with. He was able to know what he was dealing with before he got out, whether there could be guns, but it was a stolen vehicle and some other things. So it helped him know he needed to be on alert before he stepped out of his vehicle to keep himself protected at all times to approach the vehicle and those that were in the car.
City Manager.
I wonder, Chief Bowman, can you describe a little bit more of the hit list, you know, and how those are formed? I think that might also be helpful because I know we learned about it at Lexington PD as well and how they'll be used.
Sure. Yeah, the hit list basically comes up of if there's an investigation, say an officer responds, takes a report of a stolen car. They'll take that plate and they'll enter it into a hit list. And there's only so many people that can enter plates to ensure that we're not just throwing stuff in there that shouldn't be. So the way it is, the officer would take the report, they'd contact their supervisor and go, hey, this is what I've got. The supervisor would review and discuss the report with them. And then at that point, he would determine whether it should be on the hit list or not. Now, what happens is when it goes on that hit list, it goes into the automatic notification. So that'll come across that if somebody runs that plate, it will pop up from there, as well as if a camera catches it, then it'll immediately notify every terminal that, hey, this was at the corner of East Main and Georgetown Road. And then at that point, it goes into, you can have officers come closer to a more immediate response to it. And the one thing I do want to point out, I know stats are great with crime and things, but I also want to point out the advantage that it has and the success that Flock has had with like golden alerts, and for individuals to get lost, as well as those who may be suicidal and be going through a mental break. If we have a plate number, we can run that plate number with the correct, all that you have to have all the information. There will be a step through, you got to have reason for it and all this, but it might aid us in identifying and finding a vehicle that might have somebody in distress that we can help and maybe save a life that way as well.
Commissioner May, you have a question?
I do, thank you very much. Do we have any data as far as when we start talking about decisions between 10 cameras or 17 or 20, a direct correlation in our ability to reduce crime? If that question makes sense.
Do you want me to talk about that?
If you have approval.
Yeah, so we see customers have success the minute one camera goes in the ground, right? So you're going to get some impact. I will say a wider coverage typically has the most impact. We don't see customers typically take back cameras. We see them add more cameras, oftentimes mid-budget year, because they start to see so much success. So those three options we gave are within a certain budget, right? They're all under, with implementation fees, they're all under around $70,000. And that we think would be the most, wide coverage for your community to be able to see the biggest difference. One other benefit of Flock is that we are a public-private partnership, and so we see a lot of communities actually have business owners or neighborhoods start to install and make requests to install devices after the police departments do, and then that data is shared directly with the police department. So that will also be an opportunity to expand coverage.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner.
I was wondering if you had a list of communities that didn't buy into Flock, because I know I've got a list of ones that have, but maybe why they didn't and reasons why, and then also if you have if there was an investigation and there was an error due to Flock data, if you had any numbers like that to provide at some point.
Yes, yeah, so most communities, I think with our balanced approach, we see a lot of people buying into it, right? They know this data is really helpful. I think we've had a couple of maybe smaller communities that don't have the budgets to spend. I can work on getting you that list. I will say on the other piece of the question, with why people are typically skeptical, I think a lot of it is misinformation. Amy, I don't know if that's what you've seen in the communities that you are in. We are in different regions of the country, and now we're working together in Kentucky. But we typically see people just not have all of the information. They assume that it's live video monitoring or that it's going to be targeting certain populations. And once they realize with the policy framework that police departments lay out and with the education, people do tend to rally for support. The investigative portion is where I think people have the most questions, so it's important to spend a lot of time on that education.
Thank you.
And do you have data on the crime rates in other communities that did adopt this? As far as did it decrease, increase? Obviously, we'd love to prevent crime. Solving crime is important, but we want to prevent it as well.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a decrease in the crime rate if we adopt this technology. Do you have data like that?
We do, yes. I'll share some more case studies from communities that have seen significant reductions. Cobb County is a great example. We're starting to see the same kind of impact in Wichita and Houston, which are much larger cities, but they're having a lot of success. Like I mentioned, that stolen vehicle impact, or Amy mentioned, that's the biggest way that you'll see a crime reduction, because those crimes often are stealing property from porches, mail fraud, and once you get the stolen cars, you don't see those anymore.
Great discussion so far. Any other questions? Block representatives? All right, well, we do thank you all for making the trip to Kentucky. Yeah, welcome. Good to see you in person again.
Yeah, I guess.
And Chief Bowman, thank you, and we look forward to some of this follow-up information. And when do you expect, when do we need to decide on something like this?
I'd always like as soon as possible, but that would be, I'll leave it to you all on how quick you all would like to see a turnaround. I know with having the community event to try to answer questions with the community next week, it does open up the opportunity if you all are comfortable with putting on the vote for the last Monday of the month. But I usually refer to how busy you all are with that and what the needs are at that point.
Thank you, and let us know about next week for times.
Yes, I will get that out to you all first thing in the morning.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Our last discussion item, we'd like to welcome back Katie Beard. Last month, the BOC accepted a grant from FEMA to help stabilize Riverview Park riverbank, which has been damaged by many storms, and Katie's here to provide a little bit more information, and also Sean Pickens, I'm sorry, because I know both of you guys together, to talk a little bit about the overall two cost options and what that would entail.
Yeah, so I wanted to show kind of the conditions that we're trying to fix. What does the riverbank look like at Riverview Park right now? And so Sean had sent these pictures over that were taken shortly after the last event.
Yeah.
In 2021,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
And so you can see how the bank's sloughing off there. And yeah, there's just 3 or 4 photos here of what it looked like right after that last flooding event. I've also got some aerial view pictures that kind of show the limits of the bank that needs to be stabilized and repaired. Bobby, if you can bring up those aerials. Oblique aerial imagery, there you go. I believe it ended up being about 650 linear feet of bank, and you can see it kind of goes from not quite to the bridge. There's actually a CSO pipe there that's kind of the cutoff. But it goes from close to the bridge and back this way past the dock about 250 more feet. And I don't know if I can scroll through these. Yeah. There's an old barge on the left side of this picture that's kind of stabilizing the bank. So that's kind of the limit on that side.
You can see that, yeah.
Yeah. So we want to keep it there.
Just hold on.
And you can see some of the rock that's kind of washed away down at the bottom of the slope. But anyway, that's a picture of what the problem is. And so this project has been, unfortunately, a long-term project. that we've been trying to find a solution for. We did apply for and receive, and I'll probably say this wrong, I think it's FEMA disaster recovery funds. But part of the money that FEMA allocated will go to replacing exactly what was there, just replacing the soil and the riprap that was there, and then there's mitigation funding associated with improving and maybe, hopefully, permanently stabilizing this bank. So last month I brought to you a proposal to go ahead and start this process, accept the funding that was roughly $300,000. It was about $270 FEMA and a $30,000 match. Well, I also alluded to the fact that the actual permanent stabilization project costs a lot more than that, unfortunately. So when we found that out, end of April, we went back to the engineers and said, what kind of design could we do and just spend the money from FEMA? And it started a conversation going back and forth with FEMA and the Kentucky Emergency Management guys, and we found out that if we accept the money, we're kind of locked into what was accepted in the proposal, which was 2 layers of Ajax, which I wish I had brought a picture of what an Ajax. It's basically a big concrete cross that goes into the ground and stabilizes. But that was what was approved, was 2 rows of those. And the cost of just what was approved is actually still $700,000. So our 2 options are to allocate the additional $400,000 to do the original FEMA approved proposal, or close to $1.7 million and do a full bank stabilization. I've got 2 options, Bobby. The earlier date is and it's maybe kind of hard to see. Yes, sir. Thank you. But they've proposed down closer to the water is the Ajax, and then you'll have a 10-foot level bench so that you can access the bank for maintenance or fishing or whatever recreation you might have to do there, and then riprap beyond that. And there's a cross section through it, so you can see down near the water like I just described, then a bench, and then another steeper section back up to where the park actually flattens out and is stable at this point. So it also includes a rock and sand drainage layer under it. The engineers did a really thorough job at analyzing this and determining exactly what they needed to do based on soil types and erosive forces. And the big impact that we have here is the river goes up and down so quickly, and it's when the river goes down that it just sucks out all of that soil with it. So that full repair is estimated at 1.7. We took a close look at this and thought that there were some things that the city could do in-house or eliminate altogether, and maybe bring it down to about 1.4. But anyway, that would mean a 1.3 to 1 million to $1.4 million contribution that the city has to come up with in addition to the FEMA money. Currently not budgeted, so we can talk with Alicia about how we do that. I'm guessing you do a budget amendment in this next fiscal year, since we're getting ready to approve the budget. And then, Bobby, if you want to bring up the other one real quickly, I'll show you the difference. And this really is the minimum amount that we have to do in order to meet the requirements of the FEMA money. And it's the red highlighted portion closest to the water. And it would just be those Ajax, those big concrete blocks that stabilize the bank. And you can see the red line would just slope back to the bank, and it would be stabilized with grass. And we just can't really anticipate how long that would hold. It would probably hold for a while, but we don't think that it's going to be a long-term permanent solution. So that's really what we're asking you is which option do you prefer? How much money do you prefer to dedicate to this? And Sean's here to answer more questions about the use of the park, and you can speak to that if you'd like, as to, you know, why we really need this in the future.
Yeah, I mean, every flood, I mean, I've only been here 4 years, and 8-10 foot of bank at least in 4 years. And we have another flood, there's gonna be another 3 or 4 foot of bank, if not more. I mean, there's not gonna be much of a park left, especially down there around the dock. The dock, where the dock connects to the ground is already washing out underneath. So, I mean, next flood or two, we may not have access to the dock. And you got Canoe Kentucky and Rock and Thunder that does business there, and of course, fishermen and everybody else. So, yeah, it's bad down there. And it also impedes us to doing other park improvements down there as well. Spending other money to repair ADA access, to add new railings, to sprucing up the steps and just make it nicer down there, especially around the dock area. Kind of impedes us as it keeps washing away to spend a lot of money if the bank's not going to be there. So something's got to be done. We know it's expensive, and we sure wish it wasn't as expensive, but we've had a lot of engineers, and I feel like a lot of smart people looking at this, and this is kind of where we're at. So at some point, we're going to have to, if we want to have Riverview Park still be safe and accessible, we're going to have to do some type of my fear with the lower, I'm not an engineer. I said it this morning in a staff meeting. I'm no engineer, but I can't see that first option. I think like Katie, I think it will help for a while, but all that dirt and grass up there with the floods that we see here, it's just going to wash out behind it and keep going. So, just my unexpert opinion.
Commissioner Unger.
Okay, so if we're talking about the more expensive option, what stage of a flood, how high does it have to be to go to the second layer of the Ajax, and what does it look like to replace the section in between after a flood? I was just wondering if you have any idea over conversations you've had.
How to replace what's lost. Like if we stabilized that lower portion and still lost some up above, I think we would go back probably like we have in the past with some large rock, some riprap, and stabilize it. It probably often.
I'd say 8 foot's a normal river rise, probably between 15 and 20 foot maybe. Ish.
Go back to the slide. Shoot. Top of the flood wall's 50 feet. Somewhere right down here is 48.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a typical like a 20 foot flood. We had a 40 foot flood when all that pulled out.
Yeah.
And those are pretty rare.
So yeah, you're probably talking 15 foot rise ish, give or take.
Yeah, and they probably have that marked on the profile. I apologize, it's not legible at this scale, but there could be somewhat of a. We talked about how could we phase this, and so I think that is another question that I'd have to go back with the engineers and talk about. Is there a way to phase this? But the bottom line is really, in order to use the FEMA money, we have to do this minimal amount at least.
You may have said this. How soon do we have to decide to use the money?
We have committed at this point to use the money. And so that would be a question for FEMA again. What if we were to back out? What implication does that have?
Okay.
So I don't have the answer to that.
I'm saying
right
that.
now.
I just didn't know if there was a time frame that we had to commit to what our plan was.
In my mind, the time frame would be we hope to construct this in the fall and winter, so like late October, November, December. So I think we have a little bit of time to decide. The engineers are not stopped. They're working forward on 2 options so that we'll have
Not
them.
before Bourbon on the Banks. No, I'm joking.
Correct. We
That
wanted
was
to
what
make sure.
our comment was a while
We
back.
wanted to get through all of that, so we're not interrupting anything.
And Commissioner May, you have a question?
Not so much a question, more of a general thought process on it, which is that, you know, I see this as one of those crucial moments, opportunities, you know, every study that we've looked at, economic impact and what makes our community unique and river development plans, of course, we can't have a river view and a river walk if we don't have a bank available to build on. And I'm really more interested in doing everything we can to do it right at the beginning. I think it's a matter, you know, it's obviously a question of not if, but when we get our next flood. And I'm concerned that if we stair-step into it and try to phase it out, that in the middle of that process, you know, we may see a volatile river. And what do those impacts look like? So I just wanted to express that I think it's important that we look at doing the most that we financially responsibly can at the moment. And if we're in a position to support, you know, the 1.7 million, 1.4 million to secure it, I think it's crucial that we shore up this bank and keep it secure.
Is there a way to, you know, I think we're all interested in developing the riverfront, and is there a way to incorporate other design elements into this? If we're going to shore it up with Ajax or whatever we use, I mean, are there other things we can do to make this more of an attraction at the same time?
Yeah, I think we could incorporate some green in the riverbank, grow some plants through those rocks to make it a little more appealing. And we also talked about reusing some of the soil at the park. If there was anything, I don't know, we'd have to kind of brainstorm that, but if there was anything that we needed to build or improve or do at the park, we could use some of that soil to do that. But yeah, we can try to figure out a way to.
But we won't be able to use that, the stabilization. I mean, it'll keep the riverfront stable, but is there anything we can build that would, like a river walk or something like that, that would be more permanent, that wouldn't be?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That wouldn't.
Yeah, I mean, possibly, yeah. It's something the engineer.
Is this the opportunity? Speaking of what Commissioner May was saying, you know, this is an opportunity maybe to, if we're interested in developing that anyway, and maybe there's other funds out there to help us do all of this.
Possibly.
Yeah, and that's what I just wanted to share. Like, I understand it's 1.4 million, and it's something that we need to do. As I've been very supportive of finding out where we are with our riverbank, all the way around, from one bridge to another. But I think that being that it is a riverbank, and we do want development, that I think there's got to be more money out there to help us with that 1.4. I believe. I mean, Governor just wrote a check, last summer for 40 million for Louisville, so for their river park. So there's got to be funds out there some way, and we've got to start expecting a little bit more as our capital city. We are the capital of Kentucky, and we need the state of Kentucky itself to be a little bit more concerned about us being its capital city.
We can look into those options. See
So
what options.
It's also a note too that we looked at other options other than this too. You know, we looked at soil nailing. She knows more about that than I do. Basically, driving big pylons down in and shoring up the bank that way, and that was well over.
That was $1 million.
Well over $1 million.
$1 million.
Yeah. So we've looked at a lot of different options.
So so far we've agreed to do that. We're going to get the 270 from FEMA, and our commitment on that is how much?
It's 30.
30,
Yeah.
and that we're doing.
That's what we've committed so far. Yeah. But
And we're not sure of the implications if we backed out of that.
Why would we back out?
No.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean,
Why would we?
I don't think that we would unless we just
No,
didn't
we would
want
build on that, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it would be crazy
I
to
would
back out. Any others? That's good. Something to think about.
Yeah, I think that just the options, like you said, I think options would be good, whether that's a boardwalk, whether that's another boat dock. You know, what does that look like?
Now's the
Could be
time.
options.
Yes.
I would
City
just
Manager.
offer that we could do some follow-up, individual follow-up meetings with the commissioners and also bring forward some ideas for funding, as well as other options, some other design options, and we can schedule that so you can have more information before making a decision.
Thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you.
And leads us to action items. Number 5, we have a first reading, looking for a sponsor. Sponsored by Commissioner Unger.
An ordinance appropriating the revenue to be received by the City of Frankfort for fiscal year 2023-2024. This ordinance appropriates revenue to be received by the City of Frankfort for fiscal year 2023-24 in accordance with the budget submitted and hereby approved.
Any discussion on this first reading? Okay, seeing none or hearing none, we'll move on to number 6. Another first reading, looking for a sponsor. Sponsored by Commissioner. Commissioner Unger was first on that one.
An ordinance amending ordinance number 9, 2022 series, appropriating the revenue to be received by the City of Frankfort for the fiscal year 2022-23. This ordinance amends ordinance number 9, 2022 series, appropriating the revenue to be received by the city for the fiscal year 22-23 by adding the following expenditures and transfers as noted. General Fund, $1,150,649. Transfers from General Fund, $52,420 to capital improvements. Capital improvements, $98,753. And by adding the following revenue and transfers as noted above. General Fund, $2,925,000. Capital improvements, $60,910. All aggregate totals.
Any discussion on this first reading? Seeing none or hearing none, move on to action item number 7.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. The staff is seeking Board of Commissioners approval for the Parks Department to approve a response to an invitation for bid for fencing for the new Juniper Hill tennis and pickleball courts. When the original project began last year, we were hoping to save some money and salvage a current fence, but we weren't able to, so we were trying to be cost conscious, but we need to come back and ask for this. This will require a budget amendment.
And we were also hoping to add that into our master plan with the insurance premium tax, but the project's ahead of schedule, which is good. So we're just, the insurance money isn't coming for a little while, so that would be bad for the project if we waited 6 months or better to get the fence done. Plus, if they put the fence in afterwards on a nice fresh surface and they're drilling, it'll mess up a nice pretty surface that they just added. So.
And the good news is that this could be completed by mid-July.
Mid-July, early August, give or take, barring weather and the just supply and demand, getting the materials here. Once they order the fence, it'll take about 3 or 4 weeks for the materials to get here. Then they have to install it. So I'm hopeful for mid-July, early August completion date. So, and this
on the entire tennis court.
Yes, on the entire deal. Yeah, 3 tennis courts and 2 pickleball courts. It'll be the only 2. Side note: it'll be the only 2 pickleball courts on the west side of Frankfort. Only 2. So, just one note: it will be in the 24 budget as an amendment, not this fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
A motion to approve, Commissioner Unger, second Commissioner Waldridge. And any discussion on this?
I know those
Commissioner Unger?
those pickleball courts are busy every time I drive by, so I think people are gonna be really excited.
oh yeah.
I think it's time. Excited that we've gotten this far. I think we've been pushing. I'm on the Parks Committee, and I know we have a meeting hopefully coming up really soon that we've been trying, and the Parks Committee really supports the refurbish of these and getting them in brand new, and we definitely wanted to make sure that we're taking care of them the best we can and getting this in before, like he said, it would behoove us to go ahead and move forward. So thank you for pushing this through for the west side.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions for Mr. Pickens? If not, I'll ask the Madam Clerk to call for a vote.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Unger,
Yes.
Commissioner Waldridge,
Yes.
Commissioner May,
Yes.
Mayor Wilkerson.
Yes, and that motion carries. And that's the end of our action items. Discussion of a tentative agenda for the next meeting. We have a couple of first readings,
Flock,
maybe flock.
maybe flock.
And,
What else do we have? We had something else. How are we gonna, I don't know, you said we may have a special meeting for the housing Airbnbs. Do we wanna just maybe look
We'll see.
at that before we put it on the agenda?
we'll see.
For our main meeting in between now
If
and
the
then maybe or
main
something?
meeting
or-
is not too busy, maybe we can just put it on that one. Huh?
Yeah, so we may be able to push it back, yeah. Okay. If not,
Block and second readings on both?
For now.
Okay.
If, okay, we can move on to unfinished business from last meeting. Any? Okay, we can move on to new business.
I had a couple things,
That's
Mayor.
Commissioner Waldridge.
I just had one thing from one of our residents, and someone had sent, and I've been out of town, sorry, on conferences, so I've not been able to go check myself, but they said something about the signs over at the Humane Society are spelled wrong or something.
Already been taken care of.
Okay. I know I sent something out, and I was like, I don't know if it's been taken care of because I'm just getting back and trying to check up on everything, but wanted to make sure that we got those corrected before we started sending everyone over there, because I know misspelling sometimes where I or an E can go, it can be confusing, so. And then someone suggested that for Miss Beard to maybe send out a one-pager flyer for those people so we can get the pickup week for next week out. So not just in the newspaper, but maybe we could do a flyer for those families who do not use apps, some of our more seasoned client residents, and be able to get that out to them maybe on a one-page flyer, or maybe something like, I don't know, postcard small that's non-expensive, but to be able to get it in everyone's mailbox to let them know about next week, because everyone doesn't get the State Journal, believe it or not, and everyone doesn't use apps and Facebook. So that was a suggestion from a client.
That's Commissioner Unger.
I had a couple things as well. I had a question about I think we all received an email about the Noise for Jordan Festival of Arts and Healing event that is going to be in celebration of Jordan Ellis, and we were asked if we could potentially help sponsor that. I did send an email saying I was supportive of that, and I didn't know if anyone else had responded or if we needed to discuss. And then I had someone reach out and ask about a bus stop and see if it could be added at Shelby and State Street. I don't think there's been a bench there. I just wanted to put that out there.
A bus stop,
okay,
did you
yeah,
say?
yeah, okay.
Oh, sorry, a bench.
A bench.
A bench
Oh,
at the bus stop.
At the
Okay,
bus stop.
sorry. I missed the important part of that. And then I also wanted to mention, I know some of the planning commission meetings, the one last week, I know we've had some audio issues, and I would just like to make sure we can try to correct that, because I know citizens that can't attend want to rewatch meetings. And I know KCDC hasn't been streaming meetings as well, so I'm wondering if there's anything we could do at the city to help make sure those happen again and they're streamed. I just wanted to, I think that's it.
Yes,
Okay.
do you want to come up?
Yeah. There are a couple of options we have, and I'm actually exploring one. I just ordered a new piece of equipment, and it was equipment that failed. Zach brought his tonight, thank goodness, but that'll help with the audio here. But we also have the option of recording the meeting, which they do here, and replaying it the next day.
Okay.
So that's an option. And that way the recording is not going through the device that we use. It's actually going through this system right here. So it's actually loading onto a hard drive. So those are...
Will we still use these microphones? Or
we will.
Still use these?
All the equipment here stays the same. The YOLO device, which we use in the meeting that you're referring to, we did have some audio issues, and that was because of the device. However, those meetings are recorded, so we can play them the next day without the device. We just had to add them, upload them to, the Facebook page or YouTube or wherever we want to go with it.
Okay, that's great.
But the audio's better the next day when it's
Well,
replayed?
What we do now is we stream through a device. With the recorded meeting that goes to a physical hard drive, it goes through this equipment exclusively, and Zach's high-tech stuff back there, not the mobile device. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business? Commissioner May, did he have anything? No? Okay.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. So Commissioner Unger brought up noise for Jordan. I don't know if I saw that email, but I would like to take a pulse now, or if you'd like to, to be on the discussion voting at the end of June in order to support.
We'd have time, I guess, to put it on the agenda.
We may be able to put it on the voting meeting.
I think I saw the
Is there
email,
I didn't
which
know.
I've been out of the conference, and I remember I just emailed someone saying that I support it, or, I was
Can
gonna
we
be out
decide
of town
when
the
we send the
3rd. It
email?
was on the 3rd.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
do you mind, when is that?
July 8th.
July.
So I think in the fiscal year 24 budget, we have budget for new events.
Mhm.
So if it's not until July and you approve it, we can just pay for it out of fiscal year 24's. I do think there's some,
2,500.
there's some budget just for some of those types of new events that we don't already know about. So, just to give you some information.
So maybe we could ask them to come at the next meeting and give us like an overview, or whatever, and, cause I wanna say, I thought when I glanced over it or something, that it was like 2,500 is what they were requesting. I think there was going to be music, there was going to be maybe food trucks and things like that, so just to see what we could help out on. Cause I support that as well, so thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Should have put it on.
Tentative agenda. It is, okay. Any other? Okay. No other new business?
Oh, I have one thing.
Yes, Commissioner Morgan.
I just wanted to bring up, I just got back from a conference of the International Town Gown Conference, so super excited about that and got some good information. And one thing that we really focused on this time was there were many conversations on mental health, as we know that is growing concern over all of our communities, and also involving more social workers maybe within our police department and how we could use those. So I think that may be something that we can look at. One community is actually adding a dispatcher, and it is actually a social work dispatcher, and that person then takes all the calls, so our police are not going out to certain calls. So we have one that is literally dedicated for social work. So any calls that come in, they say about 79% of those calls that come in can be taken care of over the phone if they are speaking with a social worker. So it may help us not dispatching our police out as much if we had maybe another room, or could be able to afford maybe a social worker to do to add to our dispatch for mental health. So I think that may be something that maybe Dusty and our staff can maybe look into to help with that, being the increasing of mental health is increasing all over our community in all ages. So I think that would be good, but I'll give an update later on everything else.
And thank you. Any others? No? I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to go into executive session pursuant to KRS 61.811B, deliberations on the future acquisition of real property related to the implementation of the downtown master plan, when publicity would be likely to affect the value. Action may be taken in open session.
Second.
Motion to go into executive session. We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're now going to executive session. Thank you all. We're now back in open session. Thank you for waiting. And no action will be taken at this time by the commission.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, motion to adjourn is second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are now adjourned. See you next time.
Have a great week.